So I think placing too much emphasis on the cultural baggage is quite dangerous.
Is there any, Raza, is there any cultural baggage here? Or are we unfairly targeting a community?
A vile, degenerate person that will prey on young, innocent girls does not take race into account. They go after girls, simple. And I think by saying, oh, they go after white girls only, is bang out of order, because what you're doing is turning into a race issue when it clearly isn't.
It is a race issue.
No, it isn't. No, what's happening?
It's a race issue.
What happens if a white person, a white man rapes a white woman? Then why is it not a race issue then? Because it isn't a race issue, that's why. And it's important to realise this, because what you're doing is that you're diverting from the actual problem, which is that you have these vile, degenerate men who are harming young girls. That's what we need to look at, and not say, oh, because they're Pakistani, they're more likely to do this. No, that's rubbish. That's not the case. They picked up whatever girls they could. It just so happened they were white girls. You hear of cases when they went after Bangladeshi girls too. They'll go after girls because they want to target vulnerable people. It doesn't matter who they are. They don't look at race.
Mohammed?
Well, I think race is a central issue to this. If you look at the facts, I'm not going to talk about speculation or thingy, but if you look at the facts, 77 recent convictions, of which 67 are Pakistani men. So as a Pakistani community, as a member of that community, we've got to be honest and open enough. One of the things I called for in the Times newspaper commentary piece that I did this week was for the imams to speak out quite openly. I'm pleased to report that two of the main mosques in Rochdale made some very powerful points in terms of the issue of grooming. So yes, we've got to deal with this.
But isn't it the case, you can look at it the other way, is it the case that young white girls are more likely to be out on the streets at night? So some people might say, okay, white communities need to get their act together.
I suppose that was the second part of my argument in my piece, that as a community, we've got to reflect on why is it that white girls are wandering the streets at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning.
Absolutely, this is absolutely victim blaming. Exactly. Well, you cannot look at young, vulnerable girls. I absolutely take your point, Mohammed, that communities need to get their house in order. Every single community needs to get its house in order, because it is cultural. The culture that affects young girls and enables sexual predators to abuse them is called patriarchy and sexism. Yeah. There is no culture in this world where girls are valued on par with boys. And I'd like to say this: why did nobody talk about the endemic sexual abuse of children and adult women by the clergy as a white problem? Yeah. There's no such thing as a Pakistani problem.
Julie, sorry to interrupt. It was spoken about as a Catholic problem, and lots of people said the Catholic Church needs to get its act together.
But we didn't talk about white men abusing white children. We talked about men abusing children. And the way that I'd like to look at it is this: there is no question that some police have been reluctant to act upon these cases involving Pakistani child abusers because they feared of being labelled racist. And that's something for white people to look at, because if we're so scared about being called racist that we allow 15-year-old girls to be prostituted and raped, then there's something wrong with white people as well.
Richard, you've been on this for a long time. You've been writing about this for a long time, haven't you? I mean, is there anything in this? Is there Andrew, is there any cultural baggage here?
I think firstly, let's get the facts right.
Right.
The vast majority of child sex offenders in this country are white men acting on their own. If you look at offences where the victims are prepubescent, where the victims are boys, where the abuse is within the family, again and again it's white men acting alone. What is very different about this, and when the government ordered an assessment last year of street grooming, they found that in a country that's 6% Asian, 46% of all offenders were Asian, and when it came to groups it was actually over half in a country that's 6% Asian. And the difference here is that this has become a normalised group activity, and the reason why you wouldn't get that, and I don't think there have been any prosecutions involving groups of white men, is these people, this is not an organised crime gang, the case in Rochdale. These were respected members of the community. This was an activity carried out between work colleagues and friends and relatives. Girls were being shared around. You couldn't do that in the white community. You may have an awful lot of paedophiles, you do, but if you shared that among colleagues at work with friends, there would be somebody that would say, hang on a second, there's something wrong here. And that's the mindset that needs to be challenged.
So, what is that mindset then, are you maintaining?
That's a mindset that has normalised the degrading abuse of young teenage girls. And surely the most important question is here, it's not a mindset that is anything except among a very small criminal subsection of the Pakistani community, and the only people who are going to solve it is the Pakistani community.
It's not just a Pakistani problem.
So Sunil is saying, Raza is very strongly coming back on that.
No, the thing is, you keep saying it's a Pakistani modus operandi when it comes to abusing young children. That's what you seem to keep getting at.
I'm saying a criminal subsection. I'm saying there are some
it's a criminal problem within society, not within the Pakistani community. Within society there's a problem. That's how we have to look at it. And when you keep focusing on race, what you're doing is we keep diverting from the fact, what support mechanisms do we have in place for these young girls? And what we do is by focusing on race, we take away from the actual, saying what actual issues and what is wrong in society that we all need to deal with. Not just saying, oh, you Pakistanis got a problem, you better deal with it. We're going to come back next year and talk to you about it. We have to all deal with it.
Now, Sonia, I know you want to come in. I'll come to you in a second. But
well, I do think that one reason why these girls were all white is that the Asian girls, Muslim girls, Pakistani girls are better protected by their families. And if it were that this gang had sort of got involved with Asian girls, it may be that they would have finished up with the throat cut.
Well, the thing is, you say that, but that's not necessarily true, though.
Can I just finish? Can I just finish what I'm saying? Because, you know, I spent about 16 years working on this sort of thing as a Member of Parliament in Keighley. And I worked on a case, well, cases, 10 years ago. So, and it was identical to what has actually been put before us this last week. Now, why on earth Greater Manchester Police is saying that they've no experience, didn't know anything about this, I wouldn't know, because it's 10 years ago since I was dealing with it. So I can only suggest that there was an element of political correctitude, a reluctance to talk about it. But I do think we have to take into account the fact that there is a certain machoism in many parts of the Pakistani community,
of culture, in many cultures, not just Pakistani culture. Well, you keep focusing on that, which is bang out of order, because saying Pakistanis have this thing where they think, oh, women are below. Well, hang on, you can look within the British society, the pay culture, women are paid less. That shows that women are treated less than men.
I'm sorry. Can I just tell you something that happened in Bradford? In order to get women Asian councillors, we had to have a rule that stopped the Asian men selecting more men to contest their seats. I mean, that's the... And we now have, I think, 5 excellent women Labour councillors who are Asian. And I think you have to do
Julia, first of all, because let's get back to the victims. I mean, Julia, you wanted to talk about the victims.
Indeed, and I mean, I agree with much of what you say, and I also very much respect the work that you've done on this issue, because it needs exposing, just like in the Orthodox Jewish community, just like in white monolithic
the case in New York
culture.
At the moment.
Indeed. But with the problem that I have with the idea that Asian girls are better protected in the home is that most child sexual abuse occurs in the home. And this is hidden and it's endemic, and we have a problem with the devaluing of girls in every single culture. And I do think that there are problems within certain cultures where there is a fundamentalist religion. Of course it's worse for women, but I wouldn't use the term protected for those girls in the home. They're kept from going out onto the streets, but many of them are abused within the home.
No, I agree. I perhaps used the wrong word.
The whole discussion is that this focus on the word community, there is no homogenous Pakistani community any more than there is a homogenous white community or an Asian community. So what you're saying is basically the frame of the question is, well, the Pakistani community should get its house in order, which is a completely silly idea, because people don't want to go out and police their own communities. That is the job of the police, that is the job of the social services and the CPS to deal with this issue, and that's where they have failed, no doubt about it. But this idea that the community should police itself just opens itself up to more abuse, because what you'll have then is local community leaders. Now, this is the same case you mentioned about the Jewish community in New York. In that case, what happened was the Orthodox rabbi leaders themselves went to the police and said, we'll deal with this problem in our own community, right? And so actually makes it worse.
Similar to the Catholic Church, wasn't it?
Exactly. So actually what you're doing is, if you make it into a community thing, if you make it into a cultural thing, you're making it worse, because what you're saying is essentially that the community leaders have to deal with this, and that should be the last people to deal with it.
So it's counterproductive, Mohammed.
Well, I just think we've got to take a step back and say, well, let's look at the facts. You know, I hear what Raza says and I hear what Sunny says, but the reality is that we've got a problem.
Well, hang on. No one's denying that.
Just let me finish, Raza. I think with respect,
when you say the facts,
if you let me finish.
That's not true.
With respect, if you let me finish. With respect, if you let me finish, I've listened to you calmly, and if you allow me to make my point.
Not that calmly.
The point is that we've got a problem. I mean, just look at the facts. I'm not going to go by speculation and those who've been arrested. I'm going by convictions. 77 recent convictions, of which 67 are Pakistani men. We've got a problem. But yeah, as Sunny said, we've got to look at a wider context. The wider context is this week, we saw 8 men convicted of child abuse in Edinburgh.
So does the Scottish community, does the Scottish community need to get its...
No mention whatsoever in the newspapers. So I think we've got to be very careful in how we deal with this. And look, I understand this. I understand we've got a problem. And actually, I think with respect, as a community, the Pakistani community in Rochdale has been very vocal.
You've been accused of playing into the hands of the BNP and other
Well, I think I've stopped the BNP. The BNP were due to come to Rochdale yesterday. They've not turned up to Rochdale. And I think that's a direct result.
Sorry, what did you say?
Wait, what did you say? In some ways, you're helping them. You're giving the platform anyway to that kind of thing. You are.
I think
I'm not saying you're being malicious
dealing with this
on
issue now, by dealing with this issue now, we've stopped the BNP.
We're not dealing with this.
Why is he in some ways giving
because he's making it into a race issue. I mean, he said the other day it's a race issue. Wait, if you're saying it's a race issue and then you're suddenly pointing to a bunch of Scottish guys in Scotland doing that's also a race issue. If you're then talking about Irish Catholics abusing young kids, why isn't it Irish Catholic cultural or race issue? The point is, it's a male issue, and that is that the culture across the board in a lot of communities is we're going to abuse it, and once the kids get abused, then they hide it. So this idea that it's a cultural issue then means
are there any cultural aspects to this that are relevant? Yes or no?
Look, there are conservative elements in every culture, and if you get a situation where kids are the people in those communities, the so-called community leaders or certain people who are criminals are protected, that's a problem in itself.
The reason why this is a cultural problem is because, unlike, I suspect, what happened in Edinburgh, here you had people who, in the opinion of Muslim, British, Pakistani professionals close to that case, had a schizophrenic existence where conduct that would have been unthinkable with girls from their own community was somehow morally acceptable.
Let him finish.
Let me finish.
Sonny, please let him finish.
Somehow became morally acceptable with corrupted white girls. And it's not just white girls, it's what's available. And in this country, out on the streets, it does tend to be white girls who are seen. But the fact is, I'm working with a family in the West Midlands, which is I'm working with a family in the Midlands,
okay, Andrew,
which is a Sikh.
Andrew.
I'm working with a family in the Midlands, a Sikh family whose daughter has been through exactly the same process, an absolutely desperate process. I do think there are hidden stories that haven't come out yet, but I do again think, I'm afraid, if you have an attitude that something is permissible with one section of this society and not permissible with your own, and I am not saying that is the majority, I'm saying it's a minority.
Sorry. You make a generalization and then you say, well, it's a minority, not a majority, therefore the generalization does not stand. Look, most Muslim women in the UK are abused by Muslim men. You know why? Simply because most rape happens within families. So this idea that somehow they see one class of women or one group of women as untouchable, another
I'm not going to rape you, I'm going to rape her.
It's just completely idiotic. Some of the women abused in these cases were Bangladeshi women.
Exactly.
So, you know, this idea that they are specifically picking out English women and then trying to rape them is silly, because if they had the opportunity to exploit Muslim women or Pakistani women from those communities, they would do it.
They would.
And that actually happens a lot.
And cry, they would.
This is what I was trying to say. This is what I was trying to say, that the communities in our northern towns would jump on such characters very, very quickly indeed if it was found out that they were having relationships of this type.
It would be self-policing.
Well, I won't go as far as saying... yes, they would self-police, and I'm not in favour of that. I think...
Let you expand on her argument, and then...
Can I just finish what I'm saying? For goodness sake. What's been said already is that we have to look to the communities themselves, not to police, but just to change attitudes. That's all I'm asking for.
That's what we need. Sorry, but there's been several cases where cases of rape by people from those communities have been hidden away. So this idea that if Muslim women get raped by Muslim men, that they would get their throat cut off, or that the men would police their own communities is silly, because actually there have been loads of cover-ups within the community.